And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Nancy du Tertre, also known as the Skeptical Psychic. She's an attorney who became a psychic detective, spiritual medium, remote viewer, medical intuitive, and paranormal investigator. She's the author of 2 books, which we are going to be talking about, which are How to Talk to an Alien and Psychic Intuition, Everything You Wanted to Ask But Were Afraid to Know. Nancy, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Were you ever a skeptic ufologist as well?
Oh, yeah. My background is professional background, originally attorney. I'm still an attorney, and business person. And there's no psychic anything or UFO anything in my family background. So it didn't exist. So it was never discussed. And that was that. And so this has all been part of my own personal exploration. But it's funny, I went back to my book. Here, I'll show you. It's Psychic Intuition, Everything You Want to Ask But Were Afraid to Know. And I was looking at it and I was reading the little section I'd written about being skeptical all my life. And I didn't believe woo-woo stuff. I didn't believe in ghosts, didn't believe in spirits, whatever. But through my exploration, for example, I'm just trained in everything you could think of. I spent 10 years apprenticed as a psychic detective. I'm also trained in several different types of mediumship. But when I looked back on that, and I was saying, well, now that I have my own personal confirmations and experience, but only because I explored it, of things like ghosts, spirits, materializations, apportations, stuff like that, I said, I definitely know that stuff exists. And I sort of view my job as to jump over both sides of this fence, the believers and the non-believers, and with my new knowledge, and to try and explain it to people who don't have that knowledge and don't believe they could have it. But one of the things I wrote in that section was, but if any, and this was written, I published that in second version was 2012. Okay, so it was a while ago. And I said, but if anybody tried to tell me about, oh, there's my cat, sorry.
No problem.
Yeah.
It's not a problem at all. She can sit in your lap if you like.
Okay, well, she might. It's just really loud. There. Anyway, but in the section of the book, I said, well, now I know that all these other things exist, but still, I can't really say that I would believe in aliens or ETs unless I actually came up, one came up to me or I came up to one of them. And I said, oh, that's really funny. Because, okay, in 2015, okay, How to Talk to an Alien. Now, the reason why I wrote How to Talk to an Alien was I've seen many, many, many UFOs, okay? And that's in some sense different from any type of a contact experience, but most of my friends at this point are contactees. And at this point, I seem to be a contactee. So now I have that. I'd have to adjust that original statement made in my other book, because I now know there's truth to it.
Can you tell us about your contact?
Well, yeah. What got me started on even writing that book, well, there were a couple of things. And it depends also how you define contact. So I don't even know where to begin. I've had many experiences, okay? But they're in these kind of, I don't know that, no, let me qualify it. Some people talk about having met an entity face to face or felt them, okay? or heard them, talked to them, communicate, that whole business, in a fully alert, conscious state of mind. There are many others who describe kind of different states of consciousness in which they're having contact. So I'm very careful when I try to describe the different states I'm in, which have involved different states of contact. All right. They're all a little bit, they're all different. I'm sorry, I'm being a little vague on that.
Are you saying that all your contact experiences are all different or other people's?
Well, both. And I can tell you, I've had, let's say, contact experiences in lucid dreams that I know are lucid. I've been a lucid dreamer since I was 8. And lucid dreams are very different. I've also entered into other people's dreams, been able to verify every single event that occurred and the timing of it once we were awake. So I know for a fact that I have been able to enter others' dreams. I know for some degree of, I guess, a fact, you could call it, that lucid dreaming is an experience that is very different from regular dreaming. I've had many predictive dreams that then whatever I dreamt about, it happens. So I know that there's a link between lucid dreaming and reality. It's just kind of I don't think it's a well-defined link yet. One day it will be. But I know that there is. So I've, in hypnagogic states, I've had also contact, let's say. I've had absolutely pure lucid contact, but not face to face. And I'll give you, the primary example. Well, no, I'll give you another example where they spoke through the mouth of my child. So there's this full spectrum of ways in which you can have contact. That doesn't mean what I guess, your average person on the street is going to look at it like, oh, did they walk up to you on the street? Did you shake hands? That kind of face to face. These are really different types of experiences, but no less real, just unusual. So,
Do you think the majority of ETs don't make physical waking contact because they may infect us with something that we don't have immunity to? And so they do it through altered states of consciousness.
there's certainly all kinds of, theories out there about, that they're afraid of direct contact with us because we might give them germs. Who knows? They might give us germs. If you, a long time ago, I'd interviewed Neil deGrasse Tyson and some other well-known astrophysicists, astrobiologists. And it is well known, by the way, that if you get material from different parts of the cosmos, that they absolutely can carry certain types of molecules of, viruses or bacteria, stuff like that, that could be lethal to us. Because, I went down, this was, I don't know, plus it was about 35 years ago. I went to French Guiana. My husband was training in the French Foreign Legion, so I had to hang out in French Guiana a bit by myself, waiting for him to figure out how to get out of the jungle, which he did, thankfully, because a lot of them don't. And we ended up there were only 5 roads in the country at the time. And so we had, in order to get anywhere near I think it was called the Moroni River, it was over in the western part of the country. It was all jungle there. The only way to get in was to fly in on a little plane. And then we went up the river in a dugout canoe. Okay. But what I do recall was being, it was absolutely forbidden by the authorities to have any type of contact with any of the native peoples down there because, as probably most people know, uh, the native peoples have gotten wiped out by the common flu and stuff like that, we're all accustomed to. We've built up the resistance, they didn't. So would that be a possibilities? I mean, yeah, I that seems logical enough to me. Do I know that for a fact? No.
Well, you have all these abilities, in my opinion. And is it possible that somewhere in your early childhood you had some spiritually transformative experience that gave you these abilities, whether it's an NDE or something else?
No.
Not possible.
I wish I did. Listen, I would love to be able to say absolutely yes, but that's another reason why I'm just trained. I had only one experience I could think of when I was 13, but that's it.
What was that?
I was at a friend's house. She was a schoolmate of mine. We were I was invited over for dinner. Her name was Beth. She lived in this kind of a big old mansion, and we were talking about ghosts, the way teenage kids talk about ghosts. And we got called down for dinner. And at that point in my life, I really wasn't allowed to watch TV. And so I didn't know what the shows were, was not really familiar with what was on TV. And so her mother had prepared dinner for us, um, sitting in front of the TV. And it sounds like a stupid story, but um, at a certain point, this woman comes onto the TV. It must have been like a skit or something. She's all dressed up, kind of like a French maid, and she's holding a platter. And I knew before she said the words, I knew exactly what she was going to say. And it was something stupid like, and now I'm going to serve a chicken. It's completely like, who remembers these things? And but because I'm always curious about how my brain works and how I would either know or not know something, or could I have subliminally acquired that information somehow? So I turned around and I said to my friend Beth, well, did you tell me that? And she said, no, no, not at all. And she said, but what's interesting is that my father and my son were sitting this room earlier today, like several hours earlier, before you came over, and we're discussing this TV show. So that started. It's not very astounding. It's not, enlightening. It's not any of that stuff. It just was enough to make me start to wonder, oh, so you can jump around in time somehow, or you can access data across time zones and location and space-time? And what is that? And then I didn't really pay any more attention till I was middle-aged already.
Was there an event in your life that inspired you to start training to be psychic? If not, what was the catalyst?
Well, you would think the catalyst would have been when I had a completely unexpected, my first full-blown mediumship experience. Okay. And it was so bizarre, and it was public. It was in front of a whole lot of people, uh, and accurate. You would think that that would have like shaken me up and said, "Oh, there, this is something else." Yeah, but it didn't. And again, because it was so bizarre, it was out of my world, out of my worldview. Even when I was the person doing it, that I disregarded it. So the only thing that really started me on the path was I had been working with a mentor of mine, whose name is Dr. Brian D'Angelo, who has created Intuitive Gestalt Psychotherapy. And I ended up training with him for more than 20 years. And, these are group training things.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but for people who don't know, what is that?
Intuitive Gestalt Psychotherapy.
Yes.
It's a variation on Gestalt psychotherapy, which was sort of initially developed by Fritz Perls, and with the added twist of throwing in concepts of how intuition can be injected into what classically is that the doctor-patient relationship. It's called a dyad, and or it's the therapist-client, whatever you want to call it, to the point where you, as the, say, quasi-therapist, are actually exposing your innermost impressions, perceptions, and whatever, and even in life stories and whatever, and they intertwine and they will interconnect. It's astounding with your client. And I can't tell you how many times, I mean, the client, you have almost a mind merging going on. It's phenomenal. And the client seems to feel that they have been somehow, it's just beyond empathy. It's into the realm of telepathy, and it's really fascinating. Now, my mentor always kind of tried to stay away from the psychic end of that. He kept it in the strictly psychological, realm. And he was supposed to. He's still working on this book about that particular style of psychotherapy, and I hope he's going to finish it. But way back then, I said, I called him up and I said, if I can help you write this book, I'm pretty good at writing, and if you just need somebody to proofread, or you want somebody to bounce ideas or whatever, but you've got to be like the next Fritz Perls. You've got to write this thing. And he sort of gave me the yeah, and didn't do it. So then I thought, well, okay, if he's not going to write this, it's important for society to know about the power of intuition. So that's when I got involved. That was my trigger. And then I researched everything, and in the medical and scientific worlds, they really weren't interested, or they were calling it by other names, which did not apply. And then I started talking to these people who I'd never spoken with in my life, these strange people called psychics, or mediums, spiritual mediums, or whatever. And then I said I wanted to observe some of these groups, and then I was told I couldn't observe. I had to actually participate. And I said, well, I don't know how to do this. So I'll be terrible. And they said, well, you got to try. And eventually, the point was, I got enough feedback, which is what my skeptical brain needed, to be able to say to myself, okay, there is something to this, and I have skill. It took me a long time.
A significant number of near-death experience guests will comment that wherever they are on the other side, they know everything. And to me, it's like they tap into this unified source of information.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say that they can't bring it back.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that perhaps when you were 13, you were tapping into that here somehow? And most likely that field of energy is here, but our brain just filters it out.
Oh yeah, but that's where I live. That's where I live.
What do you mean by that? Where you live?
I teach and I do readings for people all over the world. And so I am being asked constantly to deliver what I would call impossible information. It's not accessible by the normal five senses, either because it's too remote in distance or too remote in time, going any which way, forwards or backwards. Okay? But I do that. The way that I do that is by sending my consciousness out into the ethers. I've been telling people for a long time, I don't believe in time, okay? Time is simply, for me, and I've written about it, I've talked about it. I was actually told not to write about it because I would get too much flack for saying it. But if you can move your consciousness around, you can access everything, always. And yes, I believe that's, I think that's post-death consciousness, or what some scientists I know, they call the noosphere. It's the place where you can access vast amounts of information. Sorry, that was my phone. And can't retain it. And when I teach my remote viewing students, I've developed a type of remote viewing called TSP, and I've been teaching students for about a decade. And it's a little bit different from some of the classical types of remote viewing. But when you do it, if you give yourself a targeted focus, like a beam of light out into the cosmos, you can acquire that information. But you can't, a lot of it, because we have no human experience here and now in the physical world with that type of information, we don't have words to describe it. And as humans, we rely on language so that we can share experiences a lot of the time. And if we are, yeah, you could say it's being done telepathically. Certainly, I do lots of telepathic work, but you can't retain it. Memory requires, and I've written and talked about this before, you need a method to recognize whatever that weird new information is that's abundant. You got to recognize it, identify it, and figure out a way to bring it back, and then figure out a way to store it in memory. And if you can't do that, it doesn't exist.
Can you talk a little bit about how our brain prevents us from doing that or being psychic, and how to get past the brain?
Yeah, and I mean, the primary thing is you have to unlearn. And I do believe that some of the biggest problems for, right hemisphere thinking, okay? And if you look at any of the split brain studies, by the way, that were done by Dr. Roger Sperry, they cut the corpus callosum, and there was no communication between the two hemispheres, the right and left. And so they were able to study what the left hemisphere perceives. Okay, if you hold out like I don't know, a blue cup in front of the left hemisphere, it'll remember, oh, that's a blue cup. Two concepts, all right, or maybe more than that, is composite. You give it to the right hemisphere, it doesn't. It's the left hemisphere is linguistic. Give it to the right hemisphere, it's got no language, so it's looking right at the blue cup, and it doesn't retain it. So it says the right hemisphere will say there's nothing there. So we have conflicting, there are all kinds of also really interesting psychological cases where the identity of a person is stuck in one hemisphere, and they literally will physically, with their own body, fight themselves because they're not connecting. They don't have a communication going. So language is super important. If you don't have a linguistic flag to remember something, it's going to be gone. But as humans, we rely on language. Language is linear, it's sequential, and it takes time to finish the sentence so that there's time that's elapsed now, okay? So now we've burned up space-time, okay? When you're doing something, sort of right brain, holistic, telepathic, whatever, you're going into that mega, huge consciousness or conscious universe or cosmos, whatever you want to call it. You have to think essentially in terms of something more complex than a hologram, and you have to retain it in full. And our brains aren't really cut out for that. If you try training yourself to stop trying to use language to identify everything and just look at something and say, wow, that's just really weird. That's weird. The wall over there in the corner with a light on it. Wow. I don't know what it's made of. I don't know what it feels like. I don't know what the source is. And you look at it like a brand new baby. That's when you start getting real, unadulterated perceptual data about the cosmos. It's real hard to bring it back, though.
What you just said made me think about something, and that is that many near-death experiencers can't describe the other side because we don't have the language for it. Or could it be something else that we're in a space that we're not even using our brain anymore? We're at pure consciousness at that point.
Okay, and that's the argument that I have with a lot of scientists who are very materialist and physically oriented, measurement oriented. They think that consciousness emanates from the brain. You have people like myself who think that consciousness exists separately and is filtered through the brain. It's made functional within a physical body using 5 senses primarily. Those are the primary senses. But I think that the brain, if you look at, my daughter does a lot of shamanic work. And if you look at what certain types of Native American or Native medicines do, they're breaking down the filters of the brain to allow for much larger perspectives on the type of consciousness that we're talking about, that probably people with near-death experiences have had. So I think the brain is a filter. I think it's functional within a 3D world and allows consciousness to be functional. I don't think it disappears once the 3D body disappears.
So do you think then that the reason they can't explain it is just because we don't have the language for it?
Well, I mean, it's there's a concept that they talk about in language, the suffix NESS, like happiness, sadness, um, dryness, wetness. The ness concept captures everything that we can't say in the word. Words aren't perfect by any means, but they allow us to communicate and to give each other rough approximations so that we kind of can connect on that level.
All right, I'm going to get back to your book here for a moment. Your book is called Psychic Intuition, Everything You Ever Wanted to Ask But Were Afraid to Know. What are some common things that people want to ask, but they're too afraid to know about it?
Oh my goodness, where do I start with that one? Well, I mean, most people I find are just, really terrified of, talking about stuff like mind reading or telepathy or clairvoyance or prophecy or any of that. It's like, you got to be kidding me. I don't know why they're so afraid of it, other than the fact it just feels alien to them. So they don't get it, and they don't know what to make of it. They don't know what to contribute to that conversation. But and I find also men more than women are terrified, and I'm talking, you know, big hulking, like beat the crap out of anybody type of guys, and they are they are usually the most frightened.
I could see that.
Yeah.
What do you think the biggest fear is? Is it the fear of death?
Okay, so um one of my mentors also was Ingo Swann, who created remote viewing. Okay. And I was walking, I knew him for about 10 years before he passed. And one time walking around the East Village with him, he said to me, we were on the sidewalk. He said, "Do you know what almost most people are afraid of?" And I was pretty sure I knew the answer to that one. And I said, "Well, yeah, I think." And he interrupted me. He said, "It's that you can read their minds." People are terrified because everybody apparently has a secret that they don't want anybody, and I mean nobody to ever find out, because that would be terrifying, because then you'd really get to know them. Here's the thing, if you're doing any type of this type of work, remote viewing or telepathic stuff or clairvoyance or prophecy, any of that stuff, you already know. We're living in this imaginary little private closet or something. It's not. It's more like a fishbowl. Everybody gets to see in. We all, I mean, everything is accessible. Let me put it that way. That's why a lot of people they're afraid to go see a psychic, for example. They're afraid they're going to be told something that, la, 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 they don't want to hear. It would be too scary.
What's been pretty popular on YouTube lately is the theory that we live in a simulation.
Mm.
What's your thoughts on that?
My immediate thoughts are, since I'm a very old person, is that if you go through, let's say, the 20th century, and you look at how people uh, made metaphors for different types of consciousness experiences, or telepathy, or prediction, that kind of stuff, they always compared them to whatever the current man-made physical technologies were. So you started, if you go back, it was a Sinclair Lewis, mental radio. You go back into, I think it was, that's way back. So in those days, the early part of the 20th century, oh yeah, everything was compared to a radio. And then you got TV, the early TV stuff. So now you had visuals attached to it. Then you had computers, and the computers are now being used to, talk about, downloads. I mean, that's a computer word, and stuff like that. We're still moving. I don't see this, we're not stopping here. And we're getting into much more, we're getting into virtual reality realms. And that's where we are really with technology right now, which is why I think people are talking about, this entire experience as being a potential virtual reality. It's the only thing we know to compare it with.
That makes a lot of sense. But even at that, do you think this is some kind of virtual reality? I mean, this, because many near-death experiencers will comment that this reality is dreamlike and the other side is real, if not more real than here.
Have you ever had, like maybe as you're falling off to sleep, the experience of colors that are so fabulous, so vibrant, and so extraordinary? You've never seen them in your real life, but they're there. Have you ever had that?
I haven't.
I always play music when I'm falling off to sleep. I have created in my head, I've heard some of the most extraordinary, like symphonies of, or um, incredibly beautiful music. Okay. So it's not separate. I don't believe that. Okay. I believe, it's us. We're here. It is us. We are it. And we are all together. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah. I don't think that it's if you want to call it a virtual simulation, well, okay, let's look at the metaphor of that. Okay. The metaphor is that some architect, some guy or gal created the algorithms that then created a virtual reality experience, And then other beings were plugged into that experience that was being governed essentially by algorithms created by somebody else. So it doesn't belong to us. So there's a sense of lack of ownership. Okay. And if you look around the world today, frankly, I think there's a huge sense of lack of ownership. Nobody takes responsibility. When they see things going south, they say, oh, well, I just want to have my last, fill in the blank because I do and I deserve it. So there's a lack of connection with our reality. And if you want to take that into a deeper level, take that into the level of we can all mind read. Everybody can. And I know that because I come from the other side of the fence and was able to train into it. So I know we all can. It takes a lot of discipline and work and all that kind of stuff. But if we can all read each other's minds, then the thing that Ingo said to me really should not be terrifying to anybody. Everybody's got to open up to that fact that we can only read each other's minds, which means we are all being influenced and influencing others. We are the creators of the algorithms going out, and we are the receiver of others' algorithms coming in. So in that sense, it's a sort of I don't know if you want to call it a virtual reality. I just don't think that's a great metaphor. It's a current metaphor. It'll change.
When you're doing your remote viewing, are you in a trance state?
Yeah, a quasi, I don't do like real serious full-blown trances. But yeah, I'm in a light trance state. Yeah.
All right. When you do that, do you have to completely filter out all your senses here and accept whatever data comes in? Is that how it works?
No, I mean, I've been able to, because I've been doing this for long enough, I can, well, let me put it this way. I don't like having excess noise around. I don't like having anything particularly going on in my field of vision. I'm staying completely focused and I'm traveling. Okay. It used to be that if I had to do it in complete silence. Then I started experimenting with we're doing this kind of work with a little bit of music, turning on the whatever, playlist or something. And I discovered that a lot of the like lyrics or even the tempo of the music would influence whatever I was picking up because it was influencing me. So I had to be really careful with that. Now I can listen to stuff. I am extremely tuned into subliminal influences on stuff. I pick them up really fast. So I can do that with music now. And pretty much I'm okay with that. I can zone it out.
Well, you mentioned earlier that your remote viewing was called TSP, I think.
Mhm.
How is that different from other forms of remote viewing?
It's different in several ways. Uh, I allow synchronicities and I score them. No other type of remote viewing does that. And I do believe that synchronicity is almost like a, what would you call it? Psychokinetic uh, interaction of a remote viewing process.
Well, don't during remote viewing, they will focus on a target and then just whatever they get, they'll write down, like I saw a circle or something. So if
Yeah.
you're adding a synchronicity to that, what do you mean by that?
It's okay. Well, it's very specific. It's a synchronicity that occurs during the limited TSP time period, which differentiates it from your sort of normal Jungian type of synchronicity. Which one thing that kind of disturbed me about that was that, and I never felt that Jung really addressed it, was he didn't put any time limits, and ultimately everything will be a synchronicity if you just wait long enough. Okay. So that always kind of bugged me about his system. But anyway, so I modified it. into just the TSP time period. But yeah, you're also well, these days most of the classical remote viewers doing controlled remote viewing or associative remote viewing, extended remote viewing, those kinds of things, they're I would say primarily the second and third generation remote viewers seem to have gotten stuck on this idea that, oh, for it to be legitimate, your target has to be blind. And I've done plenty of blind targets, and TSP absolutely allows for blind targets, meaning you know absolutely nothing. Essentially, usually you're given a pair of coordinates that represent whatever the target is, but you don't know what it is. But TSP also allows a certain limited amount of front loading. And that's always been kind of poo-pooed by the classical remote viewing community because, for very good reasons, by the way, most people will get their psychic sensing will get polluted or biased by any incoming information that's given to them. What I teach my students is how to overcome that. So you have to learn how to recognize it first. We have to learn how to recognize things like subliminal influences, or what do you think about something? How would that affect how you would then gravitate towards certain types of information about that target? You have to look at all these things. That's never taught in classical remote viewing. They're just essentially doing it blind. And that's fine. And you can do it blind in TSP too. But generally, it's based on questions, photographs, or questions and photographs. So questions, photographs, both or neither. Those are your options. The scoring is different. It's, I think, a little bit more precise. So therefore, the judging is different. Also, well, your client becomes the judge. It is no longer some third party or the viewer themselves that's doing their own judging. Okay? It's because the client is the person who holds the true significance of your data. Your data is not meant for you anyway. It's meant for them. And it's certainly not meant for an encyclopedia, which will define certain things as, such and such. It's not meant for that. It's not meant for a third-party judge. So TSP has the client acting as judge. That's another difference. So there are a bunch of differences.
Do you think governments are still using remote viewers but not talking about it?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's gone really mainstream. Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to switch gears with you and get back to how to talk to an alien. Do you think that the ETs know all of the languages on Earth, or they can just somehow use telepathy and then that's how they communicate with us and it's automatically translated?
I think they're doing it a number of different ways, and it depends on, I think, I don't know what the species, the race of ETs that you're involved with. And I think they, I've in the book, that's what I talk about, a bunch of different documented cases where there were references to how the contactee was able to communicate. And so they come up a whole bunch of different ways. Some of them speak hundreds of human languages. Some of them don't speak any human language. Some speak alien languages. Some do it telepathically. Some do it linguistically. Some do it with the help of obvious technologies. Kind of like Google Translator. Turn a little knob and you can adjust the language. What I think is been most interesting is that a lot of them speak with accents, and accents are very interesting sources of information. It may tell you how long that ET has been studying the language or from whom, whether they have maybe lived on Earth, maybe have, mingled with enough humans to get an accent perfect
Hmm.
or not perfect, um, or if they've lived in a different country but are speaking a foreign language. So, and so I've come up with all that kind of information. And yeah, telepathic. I get some flack from some, um, contactees who insist, oh, ETs don't communicate, in language. That's ridiculous. It's everybody knows it's all telepathic. No, that's not true. It just isn't. Yes. Do they communicate telepathically in a huge number of cases? Absolutely true. Um, and I've had telepathic communication from an ET, I'm assuming it was an ET, who would break up my phone conversations between my daughter and I for close to 2 years after we um, had a sighting. It was quite close. It was about 500 to 1,000 feet up in the air. It was a boomerang-shaped craft the size of a football field covered in orange lights, and a giant orb came off of the wing, flew around it, disappeared, came back, redocked, disappeared, and eventually the whole thing cloaked or dematerialized in 3 phases. But after that time, we would get these very, very weird telephone interruptions where um, uh, we would no longer be able to hear each other. We would both hear this voice. It was a very imposing electronic male sounding voice. It was coming through huge distortion waves. It was speaking an unknown language, and I'm good at language. I speak several, and I understand others that I don't speak. And it was nothing that I could identify. And it would talk, 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 talk. Once it said my daughter's name, then it would hang up both of us simultaneously. We wouldn't be able to call each other back for about 5 or 10 minutes. And as I said, that went on for close to 2 years, and then it just stopped. And until several years later, I got woken up in the middle of the night by this voice, therefore, a telepathic communication. It was the first time it had ever done that. And I thought that was so strange. I mean, I would recognize that voice anywhere. And I called up my daughter the next day. She lives in New York, and at the time I was in New Jersey. And I said, something, I want to tell you something about that voice. And she said, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. I just had the same thing, except I was calling, she hadn't had any experiences either for several years. We hadn't talked about it for years. She tried calling up a friend of hers, was leaving a message on the machine or on the phone, and the voice started to talk. So yeah, they communicate a whole lot of different ways. I'm very aware of that.
Did you say that the voice said her name?
Yeah,
And you could recognize that?
that was the only thing I recognized. Yeah.
Did you say it sounded like it was a mechanical voice?
There's a physicist named Jack Sarfati. Have you heard of him?
Mm-mm.
He's a well-known guy. He's very controversial, but his I interviewed him for this book and I now am involved in some of his Google group things. Um, but he talks about when he was about, I think, 12 or 13 years old, and he started receiving phone calls from a cold electronic sounding alien voice which essentially, and his mother heard it too, so it wasn't just his imagination, was instructing him, but this voice spoke in English. It was instructing Jack to build this craft, and this craft exists in the future. Okay? And that's what Jack has spent essentially his entire life attempting to do. So he's very much involved in, UFO craft, materials, propulsion, technology, that kind of stuff. But very, very similar. And I know other people have also heard these weird, kind of strange. Well, I've actually heard them. I had a colleague of mine who was a pilot, and he'd been recording. He said he was receiving calls from himself from the future. Okay. And I know that John Keel, who you probably know, great ufologist, had also received what he believed were calls from himself in the future. Other people have received these electronic sounding voices. And I can tell you, once it got on, well, I was actually conducting a reading with somebody. I'd never discussed UFO things with this particular person, and it cut us off in the same way, hung us both up simultaneously. We couldn't get back to each other. And so in the meantime, she sent me an email and she said, "What the hell was that? And whatever the hell that was not of this earth." So it was clear, obviously, not just to me, that it really that it was incredibly strange, unearthly. Okay.
Do you think that those ETs or that one ET was trying to communicate with you or being malicious and interrupting?
Oh no, I don't listen. I rarely assume. I don't assume the worst about people or whatever. I generally assume the best about everybody. So no, my go-to is not to think, oh, malicious, bad, evil, hurtful, yeah, whatever. No, no, no. I mean, it seemed, yeah, clearly trying to communicate. Um, I, I, it may be that I actually understood on some level of my consciousness. That's the other possibility here. I wish that I could consciously access that.
Not to second guess what you were doing, but if you would have said, "Hey, I hear you. I'm trying to understand. Keep talking. And maybe I'll understand you." Like if you would have done something like that, I wonder what would have happened.
Well, it kept calling back. And when you hear something like that, it is so, it just spins your head. You don't stop to think of, well, let me think of a logical question I could ask it. You just don't go there. You're like, what the heck?
Did you immediately think it was an ET, or did you think it was a prank caller or something within the lines?
Let me tell you something. I am very familiar with, since a long time ago, and I mean long, long time, voice distortion technologies. Okay. I've heard them, I've used them, I know how they sound. This was nothing, nothing, nothing like that. Now, maybe they've gotten to such a point now, they're doing a really great job with their technology that I know nothing about, okay, that they could have produced this. But it wasn't just, how do I say this? It wasn't just a modulation of a frequency. It was much more than that. And it had the sound as though it were traveling through a, a quantity of space that I can't even imagine. Now, is that in my, that's my fantasy on that. Okay. I don't have any proof, but that's how it sounded to me.
Makes sense. In general, do you think that ETs are benevolent?
I think that you've got the good and the bad. And I don't like to break stuff down into judgments like good and bad. I sort of hate that. I like to look at behaviors and I like to look at motivations. And I know, for example, I know many people who have been um, abducted by mostly grays, and some of them gone through the kind of horrific exams and things. Uh, and some of them are beyond, I mean, terror stricken PTSD level, you know, so something very dramatic happened and they can't get over it. And they view them as soulless, as evil, as, um, it's the which you always read about, they think we're ants, we're nothing more than little ants, and they're ready to step on us and squash us, and who cares? Kind of a projection about the human brain more than anything else, okay? Because I try not to step on ants. But anyway, that's an aside. But the others, I mean, I know people who've had these horrific sounding experiments done on them, who had love for these critters, whatever they are, cyborgs, robots, and biological uh, entities or hybrids or future us, whatever you want to call them. And they felt love for them because in some way they hypothesize that these beings have a larger benevolent purpose, even though it doesn't feel that way to us. Sort of like, I suppose, my father was a medical scientist. So when I grew up, I used to watch him doing experiments on animals in the laboratories. So I watched him, do surgeries on, rats, giant toads, sheep, cats, dogs, monkeys, you name it. And generally they died. Um, Now, they wouldn't look at those experiments as being, let's say, good, because it sure as heck wasn't good for them. Was it good for, I don't know, humanity, or maybe you could extend it to the globe on some level? Maybe. It just depends how you look at it. I don't like judgments like that because I think they're, good and evil are kind of simplistic.
I understand. Some of my guests will say that the abductees misinterpret what's going on and
And
may.
there's that. Yes, there's that too. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And when, you're kind of mucking around in different levels of consciousness and different things being filtered in and out, yeah, it's very hard to make a really clear judgment about anything. I agree with that.
Well, your book is called How to Talk to an Alien. In the book, are you teaching how to communicate with ETs?
I don't think that I'm capable of doing that. What I am trying to do is to explain to people. I'm doing a sort of a comparative linguistic analysis of as many different types as I can. Let me tell you, it's extremely difficult. Um, but I do cross comparisons, for example, of um, different writing styles, written, okay? And there's several. Uh, there was a very nice system that was set up by, I think his name was Dr. Pazziglini, I think, anyway, from Delaware. But he set up a system. Essentially, you have three basic writing styles. You've got geometric, you've got a sort of script style, and you've got what they call dot and line. And then there are a bunch of variations off of that. And you can make cross comparisons, which is what I show, between people's actual experiences, their remembered experiences, their channeled experiences. And there's a crossover on all levels of certain written characters, alien writing characters that come across. So it's kind of like, trying to fit together a Rosetta Stone that instead of having like three languages on it, it's got like thousands. And you're like, yeah, 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 yeah. I suppose it can be done. It may take time for people to do it, but yeah.
If a client wanted to hire you to communicate with ETs, or at least wanted some advice from you, what kind of advice would you give?
For communicating with ETs, I mean, I think that well, okay. I mean, clearly, you can try the Dr. Greer method, all right? And you can go out there and say, come on down here. We want to talk to you. We love you. We are all about love. Come visit us. Now, it to me, that's a little bit similar when I used to do paranormal investigations. And, you go in, sometimes there'd be like kind of raucous groups that would go in and say, come on, ghosts, come on out, show yourselves. We're not going to hurt you. Come on. What are you, scared? And they do that thing, which is like, nah, the ghost really going to show up for that one? Not too much, unless they're going to push you in the back and you'll go toppling down a flight of stairs or something. There's the element of free will. I think, I've spoken with many contactees. They find the best way to communicate is through sort of a continuous state of meditation. And they find that they get downloads that way. And for them, that is the communication. And I've actually done presentations for some of MUFON's groups on downloads. That's one way to do it. I think opening yourself to the possibilities and staying in that frame of mind. I mean, I see a lot of UFOs of all different types. And I think there's a way that you have to prepare your brain and sort of always be a receiver. Don't always look to be the initiator. I think in most cases, we're more receivers than we are initiators or transmitters. We can transmit our readiness to receive. I think that's more where it is.
Being a skeptic, how do you trust the information from downloads?
I always wondered what a download was. And I got many, many, many different answers from people and stuff that they were calling download, because I figured, I've never had a download. What is that? How do they know it's from an ET? How do they know it's not coming from their higher self, their consciousness, their imagination? You can go on. They don't know. Most of them assume that if the topic is ET related, or if it comes in this sort of I don't know, channeled type of thou shalt now perform, blah blah, or this shall occur, and in this sort of commanding, godlike sense that, oh yeah, that must be an ET. I don't know if that's true. I don't know.
Well, after watching this podcast, people may want to find out more about you and what you're up to. Should they go to your website?
Yeah, I've just it took me a long time, but I've now, as of fairly recently, set up a new website, same address, so it's theskepticalpsychic.com. People can reach me, contact me. I've got a section that is devoted just for UFO ET questions. Or another thing that I have worked on is remote viewing with abductees in order to get more information about their experience. So different ways different ways it could be worked. So you're not just stuck with, hypnotic regression type stuff. And I do my readings off that, and my classes are all on there as well. So yeah, it's I'd be happy if anybody wanted to get in touch.
Do you have a YouTube channel?
I do, but it's it's embarrassingly underutilized. Let me put it that way. So that's my next step. But yeah, I do. But it's nothing to write home about.
Well, if people want to find it, what is it called?
I don't even remember. It's probably the skeptical something.
Well, do you got anything else going on that you want us to know about?
Well, I have another. I've written another book that I'm currently trying to get out there. Trying to think what else. Yeah, I mean, I'm working on a bunch of projects. I've got some international remote viewing teaching things. I'm working on setting up a program for neurodivergence, which is very exciting to me. It's a whole different ballgame. Yeah, I got a bunch of things in the works.
Well, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
The most positive message I think that I can deliver at this point in time to this planet right now is that it's truly up to us to engage in self-respect, communication, and wonderment with each other instead of hanging around waiting for somebody else to come and save us. It's really important that we really take responsibility for all of us, each other.
Nancy, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.